Awesome. So now we're looking at historical portraits, not religious or theological ones. We've dealt with David and Solomon extensively. We've gone through most of the chapters that speak about them. So now, if you should ask me, the most plausible historical scenario that we can propose based on passages from 1 Samuel that match the archaeological and anthropological conditions of this century, what would be my answer? I'm being very specific here. I'm not interested in theology. I'm not interested in religious portraits. From the 10th century, when we look outside, when we dig, when we look at historically what was going on in that century, what is the most plausible historical scenario that we can propose? If we want to talk about David, what can we say historically about him?
That his scale was smaller than what the text portrays, because we don't have any valid of evidence of this large scale ring.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. To answer that question also, historically, this is what I would say. David was a Habiru or an Apiru. I put both there because some people say Apiru or Habiru. Whichever one is the same. He is an Abiru or Hapiru-like leader who emerged as a local strongman at a time of political chaos. Local man is specific here. He eventually gained enough support among the southern highland population. Because he gained this support, the respected elders of the area proclaimed him chieftain, like a judge, like a leader, in the old tribal center of Hebron. This is what is happening historically. Is that what we read in the text? Before long, he established his seat, or the seat of his power, in Jerusalem and ruled over the region's farmers and herders like Abdi Heba had done centuries before. Does anyone know who Abdi Heba is? From the Amarna letters, I think we looked at the Amarna letters some time back. Jerusalem, in the time of the Amarna archives or letters, Jerusalem was ruled by this guy. He was the one who dispatched 6 letters to Egypt. He wrote 6 letters to Egypt. And the letters, the content of the letters, provide valuable information on his city, his subjects, and then his territory. Now, the territory that this guy controlled is what became the core area that later was controlled by the kingdom of Judah, by David, Solomon. This guy was the ruler of the then Jerusalem before David and his group took over it. Like I said, they did not change the name. So centuries before David, this guy had done a similar thing that David came to do. He had a concern because these outlaws were giving him a lot of hell. And it's this same outlaws that I said David was a Abiru kind leader, those who lived on the fringes of society. So he starts locally, David. The elders make him a chief in that local territory. Long before or before long, he establishes his seat or the seat of his power in Jerusalem. And then who did he rule over? He ruled the regions that's made up of farmers and herders. The rise of David would have been a local matter, like Mr. Jason said. A local matter. Imagine Judah, or the territory that became Judah is a village somewhere, and you have this guy come from the sheep pen, and he joins this Apiru people, those who lived on the fringes of society, and because of his charisma and maybe his exploits locally, he's made a leader by the elders. And then before long, he establishes his seat locally in Jerusalem. The same Jerusalem that centuries before Abdi-Heba had control over. So this is all local. Why is it local? Because the southern hill country was remote from the main trade routes and centers of the lowland power. The people who this group would have been a concern to would have been the Philistine cities that faced Judah's western flank. They would have been concerned about this local group. So the tales that circulated about this chap was local. Imagine this local hero, the people sitting by the campfire at night, and they're telling stories about how this guy did this, he did that. They talk about David's bandit days in the cave of Adullam, his protection of Ziklag, as we read in the biblical text, his dealings with arrogant sheep raisers like Nabal. When they heard such narratives, it brought a bond to the listeners among the villages of the Southern Highlands into a community of sympathy and support. This is how it all started. These would have been all oral. And then these oral tales would have been told and retold till layers of myth making and historical reinterpretations are gradually added to the earliest version of David's bandit tales, as I call it. It's all oral. And then as it's told over and over again, now the myth sets in. Historical reinterpretations are gradually added. And what do? Which the text bears witness to it. Snatches of ancient heroic tales were cut and pasted into the tales at various places. They collected, as these were being told orally, they collected and incorporated known traditions, and then they added them to it. We haven't paid attention to these traditions. If we had, we would have raised some very serious questions. Let's read some of them. 2 Samuel 21. At the end of the book of Samuel, we see things that look like cut and paste. Why are they there? Who could relate to them? And the Philistines waged war again with Israel. And David went down with his servants, and they fought against the Philistines. But David became faint. And Ishbi, who was one of the sons of Rapha, was in Nob. Let me pause here. Does anybody know Ishbi? Anyone knows Ishbi? His name is mentioned, so it means that he's somebody that we should know, correct? But nobody seems to know him. Okay, let's move on. Mr. David says he's the son of Rapha. Do you know Rapha, Mr. David? And the weight of his spear was 300 shekels of brass in weight. And he was girded with new armor, and he thought to smite David. And Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, aided him, and he struck the Philistine and killed him. Does anyone know Abishai? I don't think so, but his name is mentioned. Okay, we'll come to that. Then the men of David swore to him, saying, "You shall no longer go out with us to battle, so that you extinguish not the lamp of Israel." And it came to pass after this, that there was war again in Gob with the Philistines. Then Sibkiah the Hashitite slew Saph, who was one of the sons of Rapha. Does anybody know any of these people mentioned here? I doubt it. But their names are mentioned.
Are they all giants?
Okay, maybe they are all giants. Maybe. Let's move on. 2 Samuel 21:19. And there was war again, Gob with the Philistines. And Elhanan, the son of Jerry Origim, the Bethlehemite, slew Goliath the Gittite. Do you know Elhanan? Most of us had never seen this till we mentioned it. But we don't know Elhanan, but his name is mentioned here. 20. And there was again war at Gath, and there was there a man of great stature. And the fingers of his hands and toes of his feet were 6 and 6, totaling 24. And he too was born to Oppa. Any reason we care for the number of toes and fingers the guy has?
They say that 6 fingers and toes would indicate a giant. That's what they're saying today. Is that a hint, or is that something else?
Maybe it's a hint. Maybe it's a hint. I haven't seen anyone with 6 toes and 6 fingers. I haven't seen that. But maybe it's a hint. Very good. Let's continue. And he taunted Israel, and Jonathan, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, smote him. These 4 were born to Rapha in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. No problem. Let's keep reading. These are the names of David's warriors. Josheb Beshebeth, wherever he's from, the chief officer. He is Adino, the Isnite. He wielded his spear against 800 and slew them on one occasion. Do you have any questions?
800 with one spear. What was they attacking him in a valley?
Good question. Good question. No. Why did he have to battle 8 warriors alone? 800 warriors, not 8. 800 warriors alone. 800 is quite a huge number. Is this realistic? Let's go on. And after him came Eleazar, the son of Dodo, the son of an Ahohite, who was among the 3 mighty men that were with David when they risked their lives against the Philistines that were gathered there to do battle, while the men of Israel had departed. Notice that verses 9 doesn't tell us where they were gathered. It says they were gathered there. Where were they gathered? We are not told. It just says they were gathered there. Okay. Verse 10. He rose up and smote the Philistine until his hand was weary, and his hand cleaved to the sword. Sounds fanciful. Let's keep going. And after him came Shammah the son of Agir, the mountaineer. Now the Philistines were gathered together into a troop, and there was a plot of ground full of lentils. So he's in this place that's full of lentils. And the people had fled from the Philistines. But he stationed himself in the midst of the plot, and he defended it, and he slew the Philistines. And Udevave performed a great victory. So why was he in the field of lentils? We are not told. But he was there, and then there was some form of a miracle. 18. And Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief of the 3. And he roused his sword, and against 300 slain at one time. And he had acquired a name among the 3. So you have one man slaying 800 people, you have another man slaying 300 people single-handedly. Quite interesting. Does this sound familiar? And Benayahu, the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man, great in deeds, of Gabzeel, he smote the 2 mighty men of Moab, and he went down and smote the lion inside a pit on a snowy day. And he slew an Egyptian, a man of striking appearance, and in the Egyptian's hand was a spear, and he went down to him with only a staff, and he grabbed the spear from the hand of the Egyptian and slew him with his own spear. Does the narrative sound a bit familiar? And he slew an Egyptian, a man of striking appearance, and in the Egyptian's hand was a spear, and he went down to him with only a staff, and he grabbed the spear from the hand of the Egyptian and slew him with his own spear.
It's Moses.
Is this Moses?
No.
Is this a paraphrase of David and Goliath?
David and Goliath. Why do we need to know this at the end of the book of Samuel? What is striking is that none of these acts of adventures that we've read, all these people, these killings, none of the acts are mentioned in the David's narrative or the David's tale. You don't get it. It's not there. And then, more striking is that they take place in the same area as David's recorded acts, in the Judean hills in their immediate vicinity. It takes place right there. But since the person who is given the oral history is not given historical data, there is legend, there is myth, there is fairy tales. So what do? They put this at the end of the book of Samuel, which is intended more to remind the reader of well-known tales, whose details were familiar not to us, but to them. So you remember Elhanan? Yeah, that is the place where David was at. All these great people that killed 800 people, 300 people. The guy killed a lion on a snowy day. Why it was snowing, why he had to do it on a snowy day in a pit, no one knows. But you have these legends, you have these myths, you have these tales that are woven into the text, kind of telling you the genre of what they're writing. So they're not giving us an authoritative historical account. So now with these tales that they're telling, David's memory come to be intertwined with the deepest hopes of should I call them a national tradition? Yeah, let me call them a nation. No, 1 second, I've got feedback here. So with these tales, like I'm saying, David's memory come to be intertwined with the deepest hopes and national traditions of this vast confederation. Because remember, it's not these people living in this territory of Judah are not one people. You have different people living in this territory, but they come together to form one group, and everybody's bringing their tradition about this local hero, like Joshua was, who did such. So they had hope from this guy, and then the tales told about him. But we notice that in these tales, we find answers given to some accusations. When you look at the tales told about him, he did this, he did that, he protected people from this, he was in the cave of Adullam, he protected Ziklag. When you look at the tales, you see that you find answers to some accusations. What we find when we read the text, we find a conflict of two oral traditions, two local oral traditions that was integrated into a single written book, and that will be at the end of the 8th century. So this is what you're looking at. You have a tradition about David, his exploits, his deeds, and then from the south. And then you have a tradition about David from the north. So at one time, these two separate people interacted. The Bible tells of the interaction about how David comes into Saul's court, blah, 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 blah. We're not looking at that. We're looking at purely historical and archaeological data. So when we take the book and we look at the tales, we see that, no, there are some responses to some accusations. How did that come about? We notice that the assertions of one oral tradition is contradicted by the other oral tradition. The accusation of one side, we see it being countered by the explanation of the other side. So you have two oral traditions fighting against each other. What is the oral tradition coming from their neighbors? David was no more than a bandit, and nobody who was accepted to the circles of the king and then betrayed him, making him an illegitimate usurper. He undermined the throne of Saul and his family. The oral tradition circulated and said David was a traitor, a Philistine agent who may have participated actively or passively in the military expedition that resulted in the death of the first great king of the north. And I will show historically that it was the Egyptians and then the Philistines that brought down Saul's kingdom. So this is what the accusation, the oral tradition coming from the north, is saying about David. The supporters of David had to answer these accusations, and we see it in the oral tradition. What do we see? Well, in their response, they tell us that David would never have taken up a life of being a bandit had it not been for the jealous rage of Saul. Moreover, at every opportunity that David had to kill his pursuer, he refrained from taking that action for the greater good of Israel. What about his alliance with the Philistines? Well, it was half-hearted. No, he really did not want to. He was pushed to it. It was little more than a ruse to protect his Judean or Judahite countrymen. They argue that, you see, even when David hears the news of the death of Saul and his son at Mount Gilboa, he lamented in the most beautiful way. And most importantly, the events were all divinely directed and thus perfectly lawful. So this is two oral traditions conflicting. Nothing has been written down yet. So we see the painful memory of the 10th century BCE. This is what is going on because something has happened historically and one party is blaming the other for not being loyal or for siding with the other team. Bearing in mind that the North and the South, what we call today, they were not united at all. But if you live close to me and there is trouble, maybe you should fight with me. Because at the end of the day, if I lose, you're the one who benefits. So if you don't come to my aid, there may be something fishy there. Notice I haven't mentioned David in Saul's court. I haven't mentioned anything that we've read in the biblical text. Do you know why?
He was never in Saul's court.
Yep, it's not historical. It's going to come later to tell a story. Again, I am doing what we can prove historically, archaeologically, and outside of the biblical text. I need to do this for you to see the clearer picture of the North. Look at it as me standing in the North telling the story. What took place after reading the Judean text, if I can put it that way. Now, we'll move from the 10th century where these things happen, and we come to the 9th century. Let me say this. We're going to go back and give details of what is happening. Like I said, this is just an intro to build for next week and on. Okay. This is what, in summary, happened in the 10th century. What happens when we come to the 9th century?